you a
Good. Countdown. And Susan's going to give us a 10-minute.
Okay, and this
From
goes
the
an
end.
hour? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Hello and welcome to the last Chancellor's Present tonight for the season. This is a special event. I think you could say we've saved the best for last. We're going to be having a wonderful conversation with Dan Egan. Dan has written some amazing books. He's a two-time Pulitzer Prize nominee, and we're just thrilled to have him here. I want to give just a little bit of background, and then I'll welcome you, Dan, and we'll have a great conversation here tonight. There's, first of all, something that I like to do for those of you from across the country, near and far, folks who are weighing in. We have a beautiful day here in Milwaukee, and it's not like some of the times when I've talked where we've got a foot of snow coming. I'm disappointed about that, but here we are with a wonderful day for us to enjoy a great conversation with a guest who I've had a couple of times before for different types of events, and you're going to see why we just love having Dan Egan back. Dan is an environmental journalist. He has worked with the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel for over 2 decades, writing specifically about the Great Lakes. He has other environmental interests, but that's been something that's been a passion for him for a long time, and we're so fortunate to have him here in Milwaukee in a number of different ways. As I mentioned earlier, twice Dan has been a finalist for that Pulitzer Prize. I think one is going to be coming his way soon, the way things are going in terms of the way this book is. But he's won many awards for his work, and we think so much of him that we gave him our highest award, which is the honorary doctorate. So I may at times call you Dr. Egan here tonight, Dan, if that's okay.
That'd be fine.
So Dan's first book was The Death and Life of the Great Lakes. This book is fascinating, and it's something that's based on a lot of his work, a lot of his journalistic output and great work, but it's also something that established him, I think, formidably nationally and internationally as a force to be reckoned with in terms of environmental writing and really having a stage to put together something with significant impact. Just a quick example of the story of the impact is that I was with one of our great friends in the Chicagoland area, and he was telling me about a great book, and he happened to live on Lake Michigan, and he was telling me this wonderful book and telling me about, did you know why the quagga mussels have invaded the Great Lakes and what havoc has been wreaked by having the Great Lakes Seaway opened up, and a number of different things, and I'm thinking, he's read the great book by our School of Freshwater Science fellow, Dan Egan. And so, as it turns out, this person was so enthralled with the book that he invited Dan and me down to his home in Evanston, where we had the mayor of Evanston and a number of other VIPs, and we did a wonderful book evening event with Dan with this book, and that was wonderful pre-COVID type of activity. But fast forward to today. We've got another book that we're going to be talking about, and I can't wait. The book that I just mentioned, The Death and Life of the Great Lakes, was a New York Times bestseller, and it was also awarded the Los Angeles Times Book Prize. Congratulations, Dan, on that wonderful award and great recognition, and it just, in many ways, opened the door, paved the way, parted the waves, if you will, for the next book.
Thank you.
Your latest book, the one that many of you have received, and if you're interested, we'll certainly make sure you have a copy, is The Devil's Element, and it's Phosphorus and a World Out of Balance. And it's already met with great reviews, and it's the book that we're going to be discussing tonight. Just to be a little more formal about Dan's role and title, we're very proud of having Dan serve as the Brico Fund Journalist in Residence at the Center for Water Policy in the UWM School of Freshwater Sciences. I want to give a special shout out to Lined Eline for helping sponsor this policy center, and as well Val Klump, our former dean, longtime faculty member, great leader in all things around the School of Freshwater Sciences and the environment, as well as Melissa Scanlon, the Water Policy Center Director. We're very fortunate to have your leadership and help cultivate an important relationship with Dan Egan. So I think, Dan, the value, as I see it, is what this center has enabled us to do is to provide an opportunity for you to really be able to showcase and develop those storytelling skills, to give you space and support to be able to do that. So with that, welcome, and I look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Happy
Yeah.
to be here.
Yeah, and I think this is at this time in your work. I think the third time today, even that you've been spending some time on the interview circuit talking
Yes.
about your book.
Yeah, the book came out on March 7th, which coincidentally the Great Lakes book came out on March 7th. Books always come out on a Tuesday for some reason. And so 6 years to the day after the Great Lakes book came out, the Devil's Element came out. And so the first 2 or 3 months, if things are going well, you're pretty busy promoting. And things are going pretty well because I'm pretty busy promoting right now.
Yeah, I
So-
think you're going all over the place in terms of where the interviews are at, and not just physically, but also where you're beaming out and going to different locations.
Yeah, one interesting thing this time around is the Great Lakes book was really perceived, at least initially, and to an extent it really is, a regional book. And the marching orders on this book, both from myself and from my editor at W.W. Norton, was this isn't about the Midwest. This is about the world.
It is.
No pressure,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
the stage is a little bit bigger now,
Yeah.
or the scope is a little bit bigger.
So before we get into some of the specific questions, some of which come from the audience, some of which come from me, I want to just hear a little bit. You said that it's going well so far.
Mm-hmm.
What's that been like in terms of here we are about a month out of publication? It's just launched. What's that like in terms of your life compared to the writing and sometimes what has to be kind of monastic, really kind of solo work? And now, boy, it's quite the opposite.
Yeah, in some ways cruelly so, because you spend a lot of time alone working. Like I spent a lot of my work days pre-COVID over at the Golda Meir Library in one of the study carrels. I like working there because I started liking working at the library because if I got up, I'd have to worry about somebody taking my stuff, so I wouldn't get up, and it kept me focused. Now I'm a little bit more coddled in this cubicle, but yeah, it's a lonely pursuit, and then it's like a switch flips, and it's in some ways unfair to expect somebody who spent 2 or 3, maybe longer years just working essentially or largely in isolation to all of a sudden become a public speaker. And and some people thrive on it, and some people really resist it. I'm in the middle. I like to do it. I like to spread the word of the book, but I'm also uncomfortable being in front of the camera.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
but I mean, it comes with the job, so I'm not complaining.
Yeah, well, I have to say, you do it well, and you're just a delight in terms of your speaking and really bringing to life a lot of the text and what you've written. But at the same time, I have to say, you're responsible for me losing a lot of sleep, because this week, as I've been reading this book, it has kept me up much later than I'd planned on. It's just that good. It really is.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. So, and that's going to lead to my first question.
Mm-hmm.
Many people have noted how you have a knack for storytelling, and this particular book reads like a thriller. Rave reviews are coming in, and I'm really curious about how do you structure, how do you think about putting a book like this together? You've taken a chemical element, a foundation of life, and turned it into something like a novel. You've got this scintillating, enticing opening, and then it just carries through so well. How did you get there? Tell me about that process.
Well, I had to get there because it's a general interest book, and it's about phosphorus. So if you're going to write about phosphorus, you pretty much got to come out of the gate hard as far as grabbing a lay reader's attention. And it's very much written for a lay reader. I had a lot of help with the university staff and faculty. Joe Altstadt from chemistry was immensely helpful in helping me sort things out here. But it's people in the book. That really is the vehicle to tell a story. So I came up as a newspaper reporter. I spent, as you mentioned, a couple of decades at the Journal-Sentinel. And you develop very quickly, if you're going to write long-form journalism in a newspaper, you've got to get people in the story. Otherwise, people aren't going to turn the next page, make the jump. It was interesting when I went out to Columbia University about a decade ago on something of a sabbatical. I was in a book writing seminar, and the professor counseled me that I had a writing style like a busker, a guy on the street corner who's afraid somebody's going to leave. And I'm like, I am. I'm afraid that they're not going to make the jump in the page. And he was saying, if you're going to write long form journalism, you need to think of it as being on stage in a auditorium where people have paid the price of admission. So they're going to sit there. They're not going to get up and leave, and they're going to stick with you. You can have a slower wind up, and they'll trust that there's, you know, a payoff coming. And I agreed with them, but you can go too far in that direction too. So hopefully I'm striking the balance, and that's, you know, that's what I'm doing here with people's stories. They really convey the issue that the book plumbs.
Well, I have to tell you, you've succeeded, just hands down. Many people, I've not had this happen before, where we send the book in advance, and I'm on the street, and I don't know exactly who's received the book, and I've had more people come up to me and say, "Thanks for the book." I'm like, okay, which book are you talking about? And they keep coming back to The Devil's Element. They keep telling me, and it's an excitement across, to your point, a lot of different individuals, different background. You know, just not your faculty members, not just your folks in this type of business, or, you know, folks working at the MMSD, Metro Milwaukee Sewerage District. You know, it's not just environmentally oriented folks. It really is cuts across a great cross section. I think because you do bring people into it so thoroughly.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. So let's get into the core of it.
Sure.
The book is about phosphorus. And really, when you talk about the devil's element and you talk about the balance and things, I want to get into, first of all, what's kind of the core issue or issues, and we'll focus for a little bit on the Great Lakes. What's the prognosis for the Great Lakes in the context of what some of the challenges are with phosphorus?
Well, the crux of the issue is really, it's a paradox. So phosphorus is a critical crop nutrient. It's one of the three main components of chemical fertilizer, the other two being nitrogen and potassium. And we're not in danger of running out of nitrogen or potassium anytime soon. Phosphorus is a different story. There are finite reserves, and in the United States, our primary reserve is in Florida, and that's projected to run out in 3 or 4 decades, at which point we'll get more creative and ambitious at developing other deposits, but we're also likely going to be dependent on other countries for our nutritional security, which I would argue is just as or more important than energy security. But that's one side of the equation, the finite nature of this stuff that really sustains the modern agriculture system that sustains on our way to 9 billion people on this planet. But at the same time we're running out of it, we've used it over the last several decades so recklessly, and in some ways continue to use it so recklessly, that it's causing an environmental problem, a big problem. And that's because this stuff helps corn stalks grow, helps soybeans grow, helps any crop grow, including that in the water. So when it washes off croplands, which it often does in spring rains before the crops can take up what's been left on the fields for them by the farmers, it ends up in Lake Erie, say, or Lake Michigan, or the Milwaukee River. And the cover of this book, I wish they would have had an explainer on the inside, because it's really a beautiful image, but people don't know what it is. And what that is that's Lake Erie, and that's toxic algae, that's poisonous stuff. And there's a little boat, a little research boat in there, and I feel sorry for those people, because just being on that water, the fumes are so pungent that you can end up with some respiratory issues. So really, it's about the scarcity of a substance that we're entirely reliant on, and it's about our wanton wasting of that substance happening at the same time.
So, a comment on that, and then a further question. Comment is, we really have this issue of balance. You point out that in the book, the Clean Water Act actually regulates a number of different things, but this is largely unregulated. So you talk about the wanton application of phosphorus in different ways, much of which runs off, and then ironically, we have to put more on. You know, I mean, it's this vicious cycle in some ways in terms of elevating this. What's the role of you know, ultimately we'll talk more today about agriculture and some other industries that rely upon this, but going down that path, is there a consciousness today, given what's happening in the Great Lakes, given what's happening in many bodies of fresh water, as you talk about in Florida, the opening example in the canals that Duarte, you know, runs into and so forth.
Yeah.
What from a regulatory perspective, awareness is there today on this matter?
It's emerging, and I think it's acute for people who live on infested bodies of water, but too much of the general public really isn't aware. And that's really the goal of the book. It's not a call to arms or a call to action or a prescription to do this, this, and that and fix this problem. It's really to connect dots, to sketch out a picture, to let people see that we are really on. It's not an urgent problem, but it's an imminent problem, and it's unavoidable if we don't get our hands on it. And it's the picture I'm trying to show is that our agriculture system right now isn't sustainable for the long term, and that doesn't mean it can't be, but the path we're on is not sustainable. And so I think it's really important that people can figure out and make the connection between why they can't, like, while I was writing the Great Lakes book, I was working in an apartment on Prospect overlooking the lagoon, and there was supposed to be a national water ski championship or some such thing. And they had to cancel it because of the algae in the lagoon.
Wow.
People don't know where that's coming from or what's causing it, and they need to. And once they understand that, then there's a path forward where I'm not disparaging farmers or agriculture. I had breakfast this morning, then lunch, and then dinner. I will have dinner, and I'll do it again tomorrow. But as much as I need that food, I need fresh water, and they're on a collision course right now. So the awareness, I don't think, is there yet for political action to take hold. But we've been here before. In the 1960s, we had algae troubles, and that was largely driven by wastewater treatment, poor wastewater treatment, human sewage discharges, industrial excrements, and then phosphorus-based detergents. And from all that mess, we got the Clean Water Act, and that led to a remarkable recovery for a while. Now we're slipping backwards, and that's because the Clean Water Act didn't address as carefully or significantly agriculture as it did industry. And that's the price we're paying right now.
Related to that, awareness building is a great path to influence. But I want to just follow up on that. Does that then form, you talked also about things aren't necessarily, crisis or immediate, but they do have some urgency. Mm-hmm. Many of the examples you give, communities in Florida where you have individuals coming to town halls and their communities, their ability to enjoy lakes, rivers, estuaries is gone absent this. So in that sense, for some, as you point out on the cover of this book, that's urgent. There's some areas. We look at the explosions of algae blooms and things like that in certain inland freshwater lakes that are being taken over, lack of fishing, lack of recreation opportunities and things like that. So how does this, and again, I know the book isn't about this, but just in your practical experience, how do we move to from awareness into more of the policy and action? What's some of the paths that you've seen in terms of some of the areas where we have?
Well, I think right now it can come down to carrots and sticks. And, we've been working, we collectively as a society have been working with the agriculture community, trying to put everything on a more sustainable path. And by that, specifically, I mean reducing runoff from croplands before the crops can take it up. And the fertilizer ends up in the water, and the water ends up being polluted or poisoned. The incentives so far have been just that. And we're paying farmers to do things like plant cover crops and fertilize at certain times a year and not put manure on frozen ground. But there's really no regulatory authority to compel these guys to do that. With the manure there is in some places. But we've basically been just trying to go along and get along, and that's great when it works. When it doesn't work, I would argue that you need regulations. And that doesn't mean putting anybody out of business. It may mean the cost for a gallon of milk goes up a bit, but right now we're paying costs for that gallon of milk that people can't even comprehend.
Right.
Look at Lake Mendota over at Madison on the edge of the University of Wisconsin campus. There's a beautiful beach right there off the terrace. There's a dock, there's a lifeguard station, and there's no life in the lake other than this stuff. Too often, not year-round, but in July and August. It's unswimmable. It's unfishable in the nearshore area. You shouldn't even be near it. And that's the price of making milk cheap.
Yeah.
And so if we were to develop regulations that would level the playing field so no farmer, no agriculture operator is put at a disadvantage, maybe the price goes up a little bit, but what's it worth being able to feel confident in your drinking water and to be able to take your kids to the beach on a hot summer day? So and they're not mutually exclusive. There's a path forward to get there. We've just got to commit to doing it.
So that raises the question. I don't know if you talk about this in the book. I haven't gotten there yet if you do. Is the price of phosphorus low? Is it cheap?
It has been historically. I mean, it was so cheap that farmers were often counseled by the land-grant universities to, you know, if a little's good, a lot's better.
Exactly.
You know, and put it on as an insurance policy in case we do get that big April rain. Well, we always get a big April rain. We get really big rains. You want some of it to still be on the landscape for when the crops start sprouting. So it was relatively inexpensive for a long time. But interestingly, in 2008, for a number of reasons, I can't remember the details right now, but I think the price of maybe it was phosphorus or maybe it was the whole concoction, which is nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. Yeah. It like quadrupled or more. And there were food riots around the globe, in India and in Haiti. I mean, it hit people hard and fast, and it was kind of a window to the future. So yeah, it has been cheap. It's been so cheap that we've been able to be relatively reckless with it. Farmers are getting better at applying the chemical fertilizer, but the manure is a separate issue. They've got to get rid of that, whether a crop needs it, a patch of land needs it or not. And it's an excellent, excellent fertilizer, but it's also a heck of a pollutant when it gets in the water.
So if I'm using phosphorus, I can't claim that's organic, right? Is that true? Because phosphorus usually is with nitrogen and potassium as well.
Yeah, I don't know the whole distinction. I know organic's kind of a loaded concept in the agriculture community because it's so good for marketing. But yeah, I mean, for a while we relied on bird poop on these islands off of Peru. There were mountains of bird poop that had accreted because birds nested and defecated on the island, and it never rains down there, so it just stacked up. And at the time, this was in the late 1800s, we thought we had, that's kind of the story of phosphorus, we thought we had an inexhaustible supply. And so it was used recklessly, and it was depleted by the early 1900s. Some of it is birds keep pooping, and so some of it is recovering now, and that's being marketed as like a critical organic fertilizer for small scale operators. Actually, marijuana growers in Colorado, they're big on it's called guano. I associate guano with bat poop, but it's bird poop too. Yeah.
So it's interesting, and again, I'm way off my script, but I'm just reacting to some of your comments and thinking about the book. You mentioned earlier we're going to be running out and the role of Florida, and I don't think most people know. I mean, we think of Florida for a lot of things, but I think one of the last things we think of is phosphorus mines in, I believe it's the Valley of Bones.
Bowen Valley.
Bowen Valley.
Yeah.
And so we've got, I think, 8 functioning still today, or some number like that.
Something like that, I don't remember.
That they're really digging in and really going down into what really over millions of years were as the ocean rised and fell and rose and fell, we had these deposits, Cretaceous, we had mammoth, you described this fascinating era of how
there's this menagerie of, because Florida is so low or close to sea level, and many times it's been below sea level in the not too distant past. So there's this area where you can find things like terrestrial and aquatic ancient life, mastodons and sharks lying together, and so that's when we talk about phosphorus rock mining. It really typically is sedimentary rock, and sometimes these fossilized deposits as well. It's dead life that's accreted on the seafloor, and whether through tectonic forces forced above above the water line, so it's accessible for mining, or ocean levels fluctuating. We're in a situation now where we can access this deposit of ancient life and squeeze all the phosphorus we can out of it and turn it into corn and to soy and to beef and to chicken. Yeah,
and that's what's fascinating, is that a lot of these mineral bone deposits is where a lot of the phosphorus is contained, and in concentrated areas like that. Mm-hmm. Well, let's move on. We really have, I think, addressed some of this issue of the tipping point, where we talk about phosphorus inherently itself is not that bad. It's just how it's used becomes the problem, and I think that's what you described as the crux of the issue.
Yeah, I mean, Isaac Asimov referred to it as life's bottleneck because phosphorus, it is good. It's not only good, it's essential. It's in every living cell on the planet and maybe the universe. Historically, or before humans got involved in tinkering with the flow of phosphorus to the environment, it just leached out ever so slowly, just trickled from these igneous rocks that are the result of Earth cooling. And so we had this slow drip of phosphorus over millions and then billions of years, and that really regulated how much life we could get on the planet. But once we figured out that there were certain materials, first of all, it was just manure, human and animal manure. And then we moved on to bones. The British were, the agriculturists over there were real pioneers because in the early 1800s we were still in the Little Ice Age and famine was ever a threat. And they only had limited crop growing ability because it's an island nation. So they were real tinkerers. And this is one of the places where the book starts. They found that bones, they didn't know at the time that it was the phosphorus in the bones, but they found bones to be a peculiarly potent fertilizer. And that took them over to Waterloo after the battle in which some 40,000 people fell in about 10 hours, along with a bunch of horses. So that's a load of bones.
Yeah.
And it wasn't considered sacred grounds. The British, 5 or 6 years after, went over and stripped the battlefield of its bones, built these special bone crushing mills and spread this dust across the landscape to grow their turnips and wheat. And yeah, so that's one of the sources, one of the early sources, and then we moved on to the bird poop islands and then the rock. And I forgot your question. I mean,
no, that's okay. This is fascinating. Let me come back to a question that I asked in the beginning that I really didn't follow up on. Prognosis for the Great Lakes.
Yeah, depends on the lake. Lake Erie is the warmest, shallowest, most life-filled lake of the 5 Great Lakes. And it suffered mightily in the 1960s because of this earlier round of phosphorus pollution. So it's kind of the canary in the coal mine. And, you know, it gets dirty quickly. Lake Erie has, I think, 2% of the water that's in all of the Great Lakes and like 50% of the fish. But as Lake Erie goes, so goes the rest of the Great Lakes, for good and ill. Because it's so shallow and relatively small, it refills, like it flushes through. You get like a new Lake Erie every 3 or 4 years. Lake Michigan's a different story. That takes about 99 years for the water to turn over. That's like how long, I mean, there's many ways to look at it, but that's the lifetime of a water drop in the lake before it flows out to the ocean. I think Lake Superior's around 300 years. They all have algae problems in some places at some time or another. Lake Michigan, specifically Green Bay, which is a lot like Western Lake Erie. It's warm, shallow, very productive. That's been prone to algae outbreaks for a long time, and it is suffering mightily right now. But worrisome to a lot of people is like Lake Superior is considered the pristine one. You know, it's big, it's cold, it's clear. And in the last 10 years, even Lake Superior has been getting the type of toxic algae. It's actually not an algae, it's cyanobacteria, a photosynthesizing bacteria. It's called microcystis. They're finding it in Lake Superior now. And nobody knows exactly why, but there's more big animal livestock operations going on up there. It's getting warmer. I don't know about weather patterns in terms of maybe it's getting, for certain crucial times of year, it's glacier, and you need that, otherwise you will not get a bloom to take hold. But it's there, and it's worrisome to a lot of people. But the problem extends beyond the Great Lakes too.
Well, and I was going to go there next. Yeah, I mean, and it's not just, well, because we have so many lakes in Wisconsin and other cities and other places, you know, other states, but it really is a global phenomenon today.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it doesn't take a deep Google search to see, you know, there's elephants dying in Africa. There's, trying to think, Lake Zurich has a long history of algae troubles. Asia, I mean, it's just everywhere. And it's the result of just increased agriculture production demanded by increased population and not adequate policies and regulations to make sure that we're protecting the water as much as we're putting food on the table.
So are there countries or regions that have gotten ahead of this and are taking action from which we can learn? Or is it like, boy, this is so new as an issue? I mean, while it's been around for decades, the awareness and the scope of it is only now getting to be where we really need to.
Well, the European Union, I mean, scarcity breeds invention and creativity. And Western Europe has no significant phosphorus deposits of its own. It's dependent on other regions for it. So they are acutely aware of both the water quality issue and the sustainability issue to keep their population fed. And I guess I would say Germany is at the front of this. They're also at the back. I mean, for purposes of this book, I took a trip to Hamburg in 2019, just like in December. So just 3 months before the lockdown for COVID. And that trip took me to Waterloo, and it took me to England as well, and is really why the book is sitting here right now, because if I hadn't taken it, everything would have been pushed back for as long as travel was restricted during COVID. But Germany is where phosphorus was discovered. An alchemist cooked it out of vats of urine. He was trying to find the philosopher's stone, which was believed to be this, well, it was this mythical substance that could transmute base metals like lead into gold. The thought at the time being that everything's evolving and it's just a matter of time until lead becomes gold, which, you know, intuitively kind of like the way people think a chunk of coal is going to become a diamond at some point, which isn't going to happen. But people believe it, and they believed this. And so in the 1600s, this guy isolated pure elemental phosphorus for the first time, which is very, very toxic and flammable stuff. It's not the fertilizer form of phosphorus that we use. It's the elemental stuff. That's the name. That's where the name came from, the devil's element. So Germany is where phosphorus, Hamburg specifically, excuse me, is where phosphorus was discovered. Then Hamburg was burned to the ground in 1943 by incendiary bombs, many of them phosphorus-based from the Allies. And so it was brought to its knees by phosphorus. And now, on the banks of the Elbe River, is sprouting. It's already been built. It came online late last year. The world's probably, if not the most, one of the most technologically advanced wastewater treatment plants that's designed to pull essentially all the phosphorus out of the wastewater stream coming into it. We have pretty significant regulations here in the US, but nothing close to that. And that's going to do two things. That's going to give them a domestic supply, limited domestic supply of phosphorus, and it's going to be good for their water.
So, fascinating. So we've talked about agriculture an awful lot, almost exclusively, in terms of industries that overuse phosphorus. Are there other industries, other elements, parts of phosphorus producing or phosphorus using industries that we should also be thinking about, be aware of?
You know, I don't know in terms of like what percent of the pie these other industries account for the annual harvest or extraction of phosphorus from these mines, but I think it's pretty small. I mean, there are food applications. Phosphate is found in Coca-Cola. Phosphates, you know, teenagers in the 50s, they're always going down to the drugstore to get those fizzy phosphate drinks. It's a weapon. It's still, you know, I mentioned that.
Munitions?
Yeah. It was known as Willie Pete in Vietnam, white phosphorus. And it's still being used today by the rules of war, such as they are. It's not supposed to be used on humans, on combatants. It's supposed to be used to either put up smoke screens, because it kicks off a heck of a lot of smoke, or illuminate the night sky. But it also has the side, I don't know, I'm not going to call it a benefit, but the application of scorching at ungodly heat anything it touches. It'll burn. If it hits a house, it'll burn through that house. If it hits a person, the same thing will happen.
This is great to have greater awareness of the dangers and the advantages, the attributes. So in terms of at the pragmatic level, individuals and organizations, what can people and what can organizations do in terms of awareness, using this information? How can we be better off? How can we act, behave, engage, and what can we do with respect to, maybe first, let's just start, you know, the Great Lakes, this particular area.
Become aware, really. I mean, as a consumer, I can't say you buy this product, you're part of the problem, because this product is food, which we all need. But it's just the awareness. People have not made the connection between what's going on farm fields and what's growing in our waters, and that's going to come, you know, sooner or later. Hopefully sooner, and it's already happening. It's an acute problem that the public is keenly aware of in Western Lake Erie. You mentioned Florida, Lake Okeechobee. That's basically a big petri dish. It's a big lake in the middle of the state, but it's contained by a man-made berm, a dike, and that dike is ever in danger of collapsing. So the Army Corps of Engineers, which runs it, doesn't let the water get too high in that lake because they're afraid it'll topple over the banks and drown people. It happened in the 1920s when the first incarnations of this lake were designed. They weren't designed, they were just built. That was the problem. Thousands of people died when the lake burst its shoreline, burst its berm. So now, to keep people from drowning, the Army Corps has a policy of releasing these toxic slicks from the lake down canals to rivers that connect to the Gulf Coast and to the Atlantic Coast, and they're poisoning beaches. So those people down there, I was at some meetings where it wasn't your typical idea, cliched environmentalists worrying about something that's thousands of miles away and not really a factor in their everyday lives. These were people worried about their property values, their kids' health, their ability to just enjoy the world famous beaches. So what can people do? I mean, short of suffering, and some people are suffering, they can get educated and make sure that it doesn't happen to them or people that they know.
Great. So just a side note, obviously ag is the big one. Do we still have phosphates in a lot of the detergents that we use?
No.
Okay.
No, that's a critical part of this story. So when we had these algae outbreaks back in the 1960s, we knew it was modern pollution, but we didn't know exactly what it was. And because phosphorus is such a potent fertilizer, a lot of learned people naturally thought that phosphorus was driving the problem. The detergent industry didn't want to hear that at the time because that was a critical element of their detergent concoctions. So they said it was probably nitrogen, or maybe it was carbon, or it could have been any number of industrial excrements. So the Canadians got creative, and they got permission from the government to go to northwestern Ontario and to treat a bunch of lakes up there like oversized test tubes, and to dose them with this and with that to see what happened. And in the hunt for finding out what was making Lake Erie and other lakes in North America turn so viciously green, they settled on one lake. This is a simplification of what happened, but there was one like P-shaped lake that had two lobes and was pinched in the middle, and they put a polyurethane curtain down the middle, turning one lake into two lakes. One lake got phosphorus, one lake got nitrogen, which the detergent industry was hoping was going to show that it was the problem. 2 weeks later, they went up in a helicopter. One side of the lake was green as Augusta, as an Augusta fairway, and one was like as blue as you'd expect of a Canadian lake. The green side was the phosphorus side, and that's what got us phosphorus reductions in detergents and in other products.
Interesting.
And just as the scientists said at the time, you know, this is a prescription for what's ailing the water. This will cure it. It did, and we have a prescription today, but we're not taking it because there's no way to force it on anybody.
Okay. So individuals, awareness, understanding, impact. What about businesses? And you know, just you talked about carrots and sticks earlier, talked about kind of some of the natural incentives. Is there anything that businesses can and should be doing more in terms of how they approach the impact of phosphorus?
Businesses have been so heavily regulated for water pollution for so long. I mean, there's going to be people who will disagree and talk about mercury or whatnot, but we're not talking about mercury today. We're talking about phosphorus. And businesses have been heavily regulated to the point where Wisconsin has some very progressive and strict phosphorus rules, and they call for dramatic or significant reductions in the load that our water bodies are already receiving. And the problem is, that's not low-hanging fruit. Is there high-hanging fruit? Does anybody ever talk about that? But there's been so much done at like wastewater treatment plants that to go further is going to cost a lot of money and may have no appreciable effect on the water bodies that these facilities are discharging into. So we're getting creative here in Wisconsin, and we're doing kind of like carbon cap and trade. We're doing that with phosphorus, where sewage districts will pay farmers to basically not pollute, and through cover crops and just better buffer zones and stuff that has been proven to reduce the flow of phosphorus into water. So it's kind of a creative workaround to a Clean Water Act that isn't doing the job in terms of keeping phosphorus out of the water.
Okay. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk more about you. What drew you to writing about the environment and in particular fresh water?
living a quarter mile from Lake Michigan, really. I grew up in Green Bay and spent a lot of time on northern Green Bay as a kid. And I started my journalism career out west and spent about a decade out there, and then moved back in 2002. And I lived in Whitefish Bay. And once you're in the desert for a decade or so, you come back and you look at that lake. I'm looking at that lake right behind us.
Yeah.
You see it in a whole new light. And so I was hired as a feature writer, and I just kept writing about the lakes to the point that the managing editor one day took me to lunch and basically told me that the Great Lakes would be my beat.
Neat.
So yeah, I don't have a formal education in science or environmental journalism. Well, I do, since I went to Columbia, but that was almost 20 years after I started my career.
Yeah.
So it was just a love of the lakes.
I was in California not too long ago, and they were talking about rationing water. We had to pay for water in the restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
I was in Texas a month ago, and they said that farmers last year had 15% of the water they'd had previously. They'd regulated rationed water.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know what it's going to be like this year. You've seen the wildfires. You've seen really a lot of parts of the country burning up, drought, lack of ag, lack of a number of different things. We see stories. One of the fastest growing municipalities in the country is St. George, Utah, and the biggest obstacle they have is water availability. I was in St. George last fall, witnessed this firsthand. It's real. Yeah. And meanwhile, here we are on these incredible bodies, the most precious resource in the world, fresh water, and even here we're at great risk. And of course everybody wants the water. What do you think from your environmental writing as we look at what's happening in the United States, and there's significant issues? We can go to any part of the world and talk about water issues, fresh water issues, Israel, China, there's major issues. But when we look at this region, it seems like the Midwest is very well poised for becoming rediscovered, not just agriculturally, not just recreationally, industrially, with it some dangers. Thoughts on what's happening and what we're looking at over the next 5, 10, and 20 years?
I know my teenage kids have told us to not sell our house. They weren't saying that 10 years ago, but they weren't aware. Yeah. There is a comfort that we can take in just looking at that big blue thing out there. But we've got to take care of it, or it's not going to take care of us. I think Val Klump, I've seen him give presentations talking about what percent of the human body is water. It's 60 or 80%, I can't remember the exact figure. That means 60 or 80% of me is Lake Michigan. Yeah. And so I think the first thing we need to do is recognize it for the critical natural resource that it is. Then there may be some marketing. I mean, this idea of taking water out west, I used to think was just pipe dream, literally. Yeah. But then I did some reporting on all the oil coming in from the Dakotas and from Western Canada, and there is like literally a river's worth of oil coming into Superior every day. I actually calculated what the Milwaukee River flow rate was at like Esterbrook Park in August, which is like the lowest of the low time of year, and it was roughly equivalent to what the volume of oil coming into Superior. Oil's a lot thicker, that stuff comes out of the ground as hard as a hockey puck and has to be liquefied and pumped through these massive pipes. And it got me thinking that if we can move oil that far, we can move water that far, and the pipes are already there.
Yeah, right.
And it's been demonstrated by the industry, the oil industry. They've reversed a pipe that used to flow in from Montreal to Sarnia, Ontario. Now that pipe goes from Sarnia out to Montreal, so that oil can get from Western Canada to any place in the world. So the infrastructure, and I don't want to scare people because we have the incredible Great Lakes Compact, which is an agreement between the 8 Great Lakes states with a parallel agreement with the 2 Canadian provinces to not allow large-scale diversions. And so far it's holding water. I mean, these puns are just...
Water lends itself to that.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
But we've got to be vigilant because Congress gave us that, and what Congress gives, Congress can take away. But it's not just volume, it's quality, and we've really got to take care of that as well. What's going on out west, I just heard on the radio today, coming up from the School of Freshwater Sciences, that the Biden administration is heading down a path where they're going to be making the western states settle up, because right now there's too many claims to too little water. There's just not enough water in the river for what every state thinks is their share. So that's going to be a bumpy ride. And we've been through a bit of a bumpy ride with the Great Lakes Compact in the 2008, 2009, whenever it was. But we were ahead of the game because we were thinking down the road, and the writing is pretty much there that this is just going to become more precious. So I hope we do that with phosphorus too. We see a problem down the road and we address it today rather than just close our eyes and let the next generation worry about it.
Yeah, well, I think just in terms of agriculture, 50 years ago this year, Kikkoman came to Wisconsin in large part because of the water that's here. They could have located their operations, and they do have operations in other places in the world, but we're one of their primary producers because of the quality of the water. And they're a company that's been around for 400 plus years, and they have that long-term vision, and so they've been great supporters of our School of Freshwater Sciences because of this, and they're very interested in clean water, and so it's wonderful to have companies recognize, but also from a conservation perspective, know the value, like you're describing, of what we've got to take care of.
Yeah, and we were talking about moving water to people, and you could make the argument that maybe it's better to move people to water.
Yeah.
And I always think it's interesting that cities are either afraid that they're shrinking or that they're growing too fast. So I would be careful what you wish for, but I do see a time coming when this is a very, very attractive place to live for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that lake over there.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about writing this book during COVID. You were stopped and slowed down in some ways because of travel. On the other hand, writing, we talked about earlier, it's kind of a solo endeavor, a lot of privacy, and so that was probably aided and helped, but you're also writing in different places, including in your van at times.
So I have 4 kids, and the oldest, when COVID hit in 2020, was a freshman in college, so she came home, and we had 4 kids, and then of course we got a COVID dog that has it's a barky dog. I wasn't consulted on this project. And my wife, who works for the Wisconsin DNR, she started working at home. So the bandwidth in our house, literally and figuratively, just wasn't there. So somebody had to move out during the workday, and I was the only one flexible enough to be able to just get in my car. And I went over to Lake Park Bistro, just down the road here, and I took to writing there. And I'll tell you what, a minivan, it sounds kind of depressing. But when you're sitting in the seats of like a minivan, out of the context of going 75 miles an hour, and getting past, those are comfortable chairs. And then you have a stereo system. And then where else can you drive your office to Jimmy John's?
Yeah.
Pick up your food and go back to Lake Park Bistro. So it was a weird experience, but I came up writing in newsrooms, which aren't always the quietest places, the most logical places to concentrate. But you kind of thrive on some of that chaos sometimes too. It helps you really focus. So yeah, the writing process was not what I anticipated. I didn't get to take all the trips that I wanted, but as the editor from W.W. Norton said when I was making the argument that I still needed to go to New Zealand and to Guam for this book, he said, in not so many words, it is a book about phosphorus. You're not going to want to write 500 pages about phosphorus. And even if you do, somebody may not want to read those 500 pages. So this baby is 246 pages, I think. I know it weighs 1.05 pounds. And it's succinct, but it's fast moving. And that's my biggest challenge right now, besides getting people, they're the same challenge, really. I want to help people become aware of the phosphorus issue, and I want to convince them that this book isn't boring. Because it sounds boring. If Christmas morning somebody hands you a book about phosphorus, you just say thanks. So yeah.
Well, it is fascinating. Hearing you talk about it, bringing it to life, is equally fascinating. But the book is just a great read so far. You could put a whole new meaning to living in a van down by the river. I'm just thinking about that in terms of the water work that you do. So maybe next time it won't be overlooking the lake. What's next in the hopper?
Well, the book just came out a month ago, and that's like my mom asking me when we're going to have our next kid. I'm only half kidding. I don't have any book ideas that are fully formed in my head. I am interested still in water, and more specifically ice. I think there's a lot of fertile ground there, in terms of just our history of using it and the future of where it's going to be and where it's not going to be and what the consequences are. In 2021, I took 3 months off of writing this book to do a project for the New York Times on Chicago and its unique vulnerabilities to climate change in terms of water levels, because Chicago, just like Milwaukee, but Chicago's bigger and it's actually more exposed. It needs that lake to be where it's been for the last 300 years. And that lake between 2014 and 2019 went up 6 feet. People worry about, what's going to happen to the coasts, the ocean coasts, and then rightly so, but that's happening incrementally, slowly, and in one direction. So you can kind of plan, you can retreat. Yeah. Chicago and Milwaukee, we scurry when the water gets too high, and then we come running back, and we do this in the form of, revetments and just flood abatement projects, and then dredging because the water's too low. And we're going to have to get a lot more flexible in our thinking, and we're going to have to get lucky that the lake doesn't start to fluctuate as wildly as it could. So I'm thinking about that.
I know in your first book you wrote about ice and the coverage and the impact of that in terms of temperature and how many percent of the lake it's covered and for how long.
Exactly.
And how that's a really important determinant of a lot of things in the lake's health.
Yeah, and I think we had record low ice this year, which ultimately means that there's more evaporation, which means the lake's going to go down. Yeah. When it rocketed up 5 years ago, that was because we had 2 really hard ice years, and that basically caps the evaporation, and that drives up water levels.
Yeah, yeah. So there was another question that so you shared with me earlier a bit of a story that I'm interested in you sharing with our listeners here tonight about your chance exchange and ultimately developing a relationship with Charlie Behrens that's led to some further podcast work. And maybe if you can talk a little bit about that, I think our listeners would be interested in how that came about and what you're doing with that.
Well, yeah, I ran it. Charlie's, he's a recognizable guy. And so recognizable that when you see somebody on the streets of London, you're like, hey, that is Charlie Behrens. So I went and introduced myself. And I didn't know a lot of his personal history, but he has a background in journalism, environmental journalism specifically. So we got to talking, and I ended up doing a podcast with him. And I don't want to talk too much about this because it's still, I'm kind of hatching this idea of putting together some kind of a live podcast over on the Madison campus on the shores of Lake Mendota with Charlie, because he loves the lakes, and I think he loves Madison pretty much. He loves Wisconsin, loves the Midwest. Anyway, the idea would be to talk about what can we do for Lake Mendota so we can have, food on our table and we can have kids down there splashing in the water. And there's a lot of resources that are literally right on that lake. And so that intrigues me. But I was in Madison back in February for UWM's excellent phosphorus symposium. And that drew a couple hundred people. And that was great. So I'm just, if somebody's got an audience and they're curious and, want to take this issue seriously, even if they do it in a funny manner, I'm all for that, and communicate any way that I can.
Well, Dan, what I really appreciate is about that story. And for those of you who don't know, Charlie Behrens is a Wisconsinite who goes into a comedic form, kind of poking fun, putting on a heavy Wisconsin accent, kind of the up north hey there, a lot of that. But he's got a national appeal, if not beyond, where he's become incredibly popular. And by Dan linking up with Charlie Behrens, it's just opened up a whole new audience, and it's given incredible accessibility and putting science and the importance of the environment in the forefront, and just like your book, really bringing people to a very, very fundamental understanding of the impact of this devil's element.
Yeah, well, and Charlie's not the only comedian that I've worked with recently. I worked with a guy at the Schlitz Autobahn, AJ Grill, who's a stand-up comedian. Kristen Bray, who does work for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. She does video bits. And Michael Costa from The Daily Show. We just did a podcast about 3 weeks ago. So and Charlie, I was really impressed with Charlie's knowledge of the environment, and he's just a good guy, and I'm happy to work with him, but I'm also happy to work with other funny people.
Terrific. Well, we're wrapping up. So before I move on to some closing comments, did I miss anything, or do you think there's anything else that would be important for us to talk about here tonight regarding the devil's element?
No, I think you pretty much hit the nails on the head. I mean, it was a really good interview. again, I mean, and I know we've got a self-selected audience here, but just the general word I want to spread is like, just read the first 3 pages. If after 3 pages you think, this isn't for me, fine, but it's not what you expect.
It is not. It is not.
So.
It's a great hook, and it's a great book. And like I said, you're to blame for me losing sleep, and I look forward to losing more sleep over this great book. First, let me start with a great thank you, Dan. Thanks for sharing time with us tonight. You're incredibly busy, that you made time for us. It really is special and much appreciated. I also value, and I know that everybody in our School of Freshwater Sciences and on behalf of UWM, we're very grateful for you being one of our journalism fellows in the BRICO sponsored Water Policy Center. It's so great to have you as a wonderful spokesperson, helping showcase a lot of the great things that we do, bringing us recognition and also providing opportunities for you to continue to flourish and provide that type of support. Good colleagues, great environment to really help with the next generation of learners, students, community members, and others. So we're very grateful for that.
As am I. I mean, this book, both books wouldn't have happened without the support from UWM. So it's much appreciated.
Yeah, terrific. Well, audience, thank you for joining us tonight. As I mentioned, this is the last planned program of the year until we begin a new series in the fall. That said, stay tuned. There may be a topic of intrigue. We'll give you ample notice. There's a few things potentially in the offing. I'm just teasing there a little bit. But this has been a great year. I do really think that you'll have agreement with me when I talk about how we did save the best for last in so many ways, with Dan being able to share this incredibly important book that is brought to life so fully, so adequately, making a lot of waves in the world of exploring phosphorus, the dangers, the necessary elements of it. So once again, thank you. Have a great summer, and we look forward to seeing you in the fall. Bye-bye. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
That was a good job. That
Yeah.
was, yeah.
Thanks. Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, there's so much there, and it's just wonderful. So, let's see.
All right. Well,
Hang on just a sec.
are we still on camera?